Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. This is an article from today in Vox. Trump wants the Supreme Court to toss out his conviction. Will they? I am telling you that everyone is talking about this now. After, like 3-4 days ago, I said the Supreme Court is going to get involved. I have been doing live stream after live stream on this using reputable public record sources. Vox, for example, very reputable. I might disagree with their political viewpoints, but they're talking about this. The reason is that the Supreme Court already overturned, and hit subscribe to this channel right now, in a unanimous decision, the absurd, unconstitutional Colorado ban. There was no federal crime that Trump committed. The FEC did not fine Trump. The FEC fined Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier. You are going to hear from FEC Chairman Hans A. von Spakovsky. You're also going to hear from the president, his legal scholars, legal team in a couple of seconds, but really quickly. It is important to understand that July 11th is the sentencing. They want to jail Trump. That's the only chance Democrats have at getting a certain percentage of independents to just tire and give up on perhaps supporting President Trump in 24. They want to jail. They want to have that public relations victory of seeing Trump in jail. That's the only way they can compete. They're down in swing state polls. The economy is on the brink of a stock market and crypto crash. Foreign policy has been an unmitigated disaster. And so they want that public relations victory. These were misdemeanors that were elevated to felonies really quickly. I mean, here's one of the reasons why. This is Hans A. von Spakovsky on Fox Business explaining. And we'll get to the Supreme Court, and I think unanimously, just like the Colorado decision, will overturn this, because the FEC chairman here, Hans A. von Spakovsky, states categorically there was no federal crime. And once a state court decides on a federal crime that doesn't exist, that goes to the federal courts, the Supreme Court. It's under the purview now of the Supreme Court. When a state court convicts a former president for federal crimes that have never been leveled at him by the federal government. Listen to this. Hit subscribe right now, and we'll get to a unanimous decision eventually with the Supreme Court and Trump, hopefully before July 11th.
The same reaction Francie Hakes does. This is a travesty, a miscarriage of justice.
By the way, this is former Federal Election Commission Chairman Hans A. von Spakovsky, okay, at the Heritage Foundation. He is in charge. He was in charge of federal campaign finance laws for this country, along with Bradley Smith, another FEC chairman who was not allowed to testify at trial. So listen to what he says, and that's how you're going to get a unanimous Supreme Court decision.
This was a phony prosecution from the very beginning. And for this jury, think about how many weeks this trial went on, how many witnesses came in, and in the very short time that the jury was out, they decided he was guilty on all 34 charges. This is a damage to the reputation of the American justice system like we have never seen. I have a colleague just got back from a conference overseas, and the reaction of lawyers and people there was that the United States has now gotten to be like the countries they are from, where the government uses its law enforcement powers to go after its political opponents. And that, I think, is exactly what happened here.
Hans, what was the underlying federal campaign violation?
If there's anyone that says this is wishful thinking, this won't happen, there's too much momentum against Trump, we already had a unanimous Supreme Court victory overturning the Colorado Supreme Court. A unanimous, even the liberal justices on the United States Supreme Court overturned the Colorado decision, completely unconstitutional decision. You're going to get, I think, a unanimous decision, at least one or two of the liberal justices or more, completely unanimous, will side, because the sentencing, the conviction is based on a federal statute that the former FEC commissioner here cannot find. That's what makes it unconstitutional. A state cannot level a federal verdict, or a verdict on a federal law, when the federal law hasn't been broken and the DOJ hasn't leveled a federal crime against Trump.
Did we ever find that out?
Well, there was nothing in the original indictment about any kind of federal campaign. The original indictment. Well, there was.
Did we have underlying
to go after its political opponents, and that, I think, is exactly what happened here.
Hans, what was the underlying federal campaign violation? Did we ever find that out?
Well, there was nothing in the original indictment about any kind of federal campaign violation. They kept saying that the legal expenses, which is what were listed in the business records, should have been a campaign-related expense, the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels. But as Brad Smith, I know, would have testified, under the test applied by the FEC, this was not a campaign-related expense.
As Bradley Smith, who the other FEC chairman, would have testified, and this is Hans A. von Spakovsky, two Federal Election Commission chairman, stating categorically that it was not a crime. He could have paid Stormy with his own pocketbook. It wouldn't have mattered. The FEC looked at the case. The FEC dropped Trump's hush money case. The federal government dropped Trump's hush money case. They did not even fine Trump. They fined Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier, because the dossier was purchased specifically to tarnish and to mislead and to deceive people in 2016. The dossier was purchased specifically. The only reason Democrats purchased a dossier full of lies, completely just deceit, lies, information that misinforms, all the things Democrats care so much about, is to tarnish and to influence 2016. They would never have purchased the dossier were it not for 2016. According to Hans A. von Spakovsky, writing in the Heritage Foundation as a former FEC chairman, and Bradley Smith, they state categorically that if an expenditure that happens to benefit a campaign, like paying Stormy, let's say paying Stormy helped Trump, let's say her being quiet helped Trump's campaign, if he would have paid the money at any point in time, with or without a campaign, it's not a campaign finance law issue. It has to be created specifically to influence a campaign. The expenditure has to be a specific expenditure only for a presidential campaign. And so celebrities pay hush money payments all the time. And because of that, it's not a hush money payment, or it's not a campaign finance issue. Okay? So again, he cannot find the underlying federal crime, which is exactly why this is unconstitutional, and exactly why all the justices in a unanimous decision will back Trump.
Kind of federal campaign.
Underlying federal campaign violation. Did we ever find that out?
Well, there was nothing in the original indictment about any kind of federal campaign violation. They kept saying that the legal expenses, which is what were listed in the business records, should have been a campaign-related expense, the payment that was made to Stormy Daniels. But as Brad Smith, I know, would have testified, under the test applied by the FEC, this was not a campaign-related expense, period. There's just no question about that. So for this jury to say that, oh yeah,
there is no question that this was not a campaign finance issue. Remember they said you should really trust and admire the experts? These are experts, yet again contradicting Democrats. And of course, it's never trust the people. Never trust appeals to authority if they happen to disagree with us. That's the Democratic mindset.
He violated federal campaign finance laws, and that justifies the underlying verdict. That is such an egregious mistake that the Court of Appeals in New York, when they get this case, they ought to reverse this almost immediately because of this and so many other mistakes made in the case.
How many do you count? How many mistakes?
I lost count of how many errors were made by this judge and by the prosecution. I mean, the judge let in all kinds of irrelevant evidence that had no bearing on the charges against the president, but were obviously there to blacken the character of Donald Trump. The judge shouldn't have even been on the case. He should have recused himself because of his personal family dealings, his daughter's involvement, his making political contributions in violation of the ethics rules in New York. There are just so many mistakes and errors he made that I don't see how a court of appeals could not overturn this verdict.
All right, so the Court of Appeals will take about a year. The New York Court of Appeals will take over a year. They have to go to the Supreme Court. That has to be done. We'll get to that in a second. But they're already talking about this. Vox, other publications are already saying, hey, wait a second. Will the Supreme Court overturn this amazing conviction, this apolitical, nonpartisan, completely unbiased rule of law conviction in a state where the district attorney and prosecutors campaigned on getting Trump. Literally campaigned on getting Trump. But listen, just watch this. If you don't think that the Supreme Court will get involved, it's all over the news now. And we have precedent just a couple of months ago. Listen to this.
The U.S. Supreme Court rules in favor of former President Donald Trump in his appeal of a Colorado ballot disqualification. That applies to Colorado. In all likelihood, it will apply to other states as well. Live to Shannon Bream for her initial analysis and reaction now. Did you have the inside word, Shannon? Hello.
Okay. So what we have from the court this morning is this decision in favor of President Trump. They essentially say the judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court that he could be kicked off the ballot in this manner does not stand, has to be overturned. Now, it's a per curiam opinion, which the Latin for that is sort of the court speaks. It's supposed to be sort of a unified voice. But we do, as I'm looking through here, have some additional folks who wrote, Justice Barrett, and I believe Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. They write concurrences as well. So they may have gotten to this in a different way, but I don't see any dissents here. So it sounds like the court as a whole is agreed that whatever happened with Colorado, it was not the proper framework to use here. There is discussion at the end of the main decision that says, you know, there would be essentially a patchwork across the states. This was one of the worries that the justices had, and the questions that came together in argument were, what happens if we tell one state they can do this? The Chief Justice said, what if one state decides, okay, I'm kicking off a Republican, another state says, okay, I'm kicking off a Democrat, and then we get down to just a handful of states that actually have all of the candidates' names on the ballot. What would that do to this country? So it sounds like the majority of the court has come together in this voice to say what happened in Colorado is not correct. It sounds like they're saying states don't have this power, but essentially this is something that should be left to Congress.
They already stated that the Supreme Court already stated a state does not have the power to ban Trump nationally. They're going to say that a state cannot charge anyone on a federal crime without the federal government leveling a crime. The indictment was predicated upon a federal law that Trump broke. But the department that was in charge of overseeing the federal laws, the FEC, okay, campaign finance laws go through the FEC. The FEC chairman, Bradley Smith, Hans A. von Spakovsky, both stated Trump did not break any campaign finance laws. And so Trump did not break a campaign finance law. We also know because the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, looked at Trump's hush money case. They dropped the case. Conversely, they looked at the Hillary Clinton and Democratic National Committee payment to a foreign operative to compile and then purchase a Steele dossier. They were fined. The FEC actually stated they broke that Hillary Clinton and the DNC broke laws. They were then fined by the FEC for purchasing the Steele dossier. So this is under the purview of the Supreme Court because a federal crime was leveled at Trump in a state court when he didn't break any federal statutes. We still don't really know what the federal crime, the underlying crime is. These were misdemeanors that were elevated to felonies, misdemeanors that, by the way, had already passed the statute of limitations. They were so desperate to get Trump that this has never happened before. They say he's a convicted felon. He's a convicted felon. Anyone would be a convicted felon if New York or Democrats set their sights on trying desperately to convict the person. Okay, you wouldn't have to go through all these legal hoops and maneuvering to convict Hunter or Hillary or Joe or other Democrats. All you would need is the private servers. All you would need is testimony under oath about how these people transferred top secret intelligence onto private servers. It's impossible from a cybersecurity perspective and highly illegal to do so. So you wouldn't need statute of limitations that ran out. And what Biden did was worse than what Hillary Clinton did. She likely got tacit approval from President Obama and all the intel agencies, which is also illegal. But anyway, what Biden did with Hunter is pretty much obvious bribery and graft schemes. And the New York Post should have gotten a Pulitzer Prize. There are literally emails in the New York Post published stating, how can you use your influence on the company's behalf? They're literally asking Hunter for influence. And then you have the Daily Mail and others, with all of this money flow and all of these transactions with hundreds of millions and tens of millions of dollars and very, very shady deals with corporations that were linked to intelligence agencies. Then you have Ted Cruz accusing Hunter of summarizing classified data to facilitate business deals. All you would need is a laptop. All you would need is servers. You already have everything to convict with Democrats. With Trump, they went, they did everything they could possibly do, and still it'll be overturned by the Supreme Court. Hit subscribe if you're new. I'll be back also at 10 p.m. Eastern tonight.
And so they agreed to that point, but how they got to these different positions, how they got to the agreement, they found some different maps there, but they got to the same end result, guys.
So Shannon, I have two questions for you. One is about
Exactly. Special access program intelligence. It's impossible from a cybersecurity perspective to transfer that onto servers. You wouldn't need statute of limitations for record keeping or record keeping violations where the statute of limitations expired and you had to make up a federal crime. It's impossible to transfer exactly SAP intelligence onto private servers. It's highly illegal and impossible from a cybersecurity perspective. You wouldn't need all of these legal, you wouldn't need to jump through these legal hoops. But with Trump, they did everything possible. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, watch this channel. I've been right about pretty much everything the past 5-6 months. The Supreme Court will get involved, will overturn, I think likely unanimous decision, just like they did with Colorado.
About Sotomayor. She was considered to be somebody who might disagree. And also, does this mean that for any other state that is thinking about this, like Illinois, for example, that if they're thinking of trying to keep Trump off the ballot, that they would be barred from doing so based on this decision?
Yeah, what I've seen so far of this and trying to read through here, it sounds like what they're saying is the states don't have this power. So that would mean any state, essentially saying this is something that should have been left to Congress. If you're going to, there's questions, not to get too wonky, but about the 14th Amendment, if it was self-executing, if states could pick it up and say, we find someone we think was guilty of insurrection, and so we're saying they can't be on our ballot. There was question, though, whether Congress has to give some framework for actually kicking someone off the ballot or making a decision about kicking someone off the ballot. So it sounds like here they say the disruption to allow states would be acute, could nullify the votes of millions and change the election.
So this is why, ladies and gentlemen, really quickly, this is why it has to go to the Supreme Court. This is why even Vox and others are talking about it today. June 4th, 2024, today. I have been this from the day that I mentioned it. Now everyone is talking about it. This is exactly why the timeline. Hit subscribe if you're new. It has to go to the Supreme Court before July 11th.
Former Manhattan DA prosecutor Elliot Feelig joins me now. Jonathan Turley, law professor, Washington University. Which university? It's Washington. George Washington. That's the one. Well, Turley says he is convinced that the decision will be reversed, either in the state or the federal system. Do you agree with that? But more to the point, when might it be reversed?
Right. So they have a lot of significant potential appellate issues, but a couple of things. Number one, an appeal would not be heard most likely for at least a year before the intermediate appellate court hears it. And number two, politics should not play a role in these things, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that every single appellate judge in New York, both in the intermediate court and the high court, is a Democratic appointee.
Wait a second. If he runs in the election, Trump's in the election, and he loses, but then after the election, his conviction on these felony counts is reversed.
Right.
Then what?
Then there's no recourse other than too bad, so sad.
But that's outrageous.
No confidence in the judicial system.
I mean, that just sinks my confidence. You're right, Lauren. That sinks my confidence in the judicial system. That's wrong.
Appeal rarely heard in less than a year, and you're talking about a voluminous transcript and so many potential appellate issues. That makes it even longer, potentially.
Now, does it have to be all 34 counts reversed?
Most likely the same issues would have impacted all of the counts. So my suspicion is that if there were a reversal, it would affect all 34 equally.
If he is sentenced to jail, I think it's July the 11th, I believe, right before
Correct.
the Republican convention, if he's sentenced to jail, will he actually go to jail?
Well, I think he shouldn't be sentenced to jail because it's the lowest level felony in the state.
They want to send him to jail. That's the only thing they can run on. The only thing they can say is, well, yeah, the economy stinks, foreign policy is a catastrophe under Biden, but at least we're not in jail. And for actual crimes they get away with, they get 50 intelligence officials to lie about a laptop that is almost certainly full of graft and bribery. They get the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation to say, well, no reasonable prosecutor would indict a person who has private servers. There was a Navy commander who just got convicted of setting up Wi-Fi. Okay, forget private servers, setting up a private Wi-Fi network. Okay, and the commander was convicted just the other day. Clinton had private servers with top secret intelligence, special access program intelligence, transferred onto them from government agencies. It's impossible from a cybersecurity perspective to do it. But of course, the Democrats, they don't get indicted. Okay? Trump got indicted for something that wasn't even a federal crime. He got convicted for something that wasn't even a federal crime. They want to be able to say that he's in jail. What they want to do, ladies and gentlemen, is they want enough Americans to be tired and fatigued of their apoplectic, maniacal reaction to Trump. Their completely apoplectic and hysterical reaction to Trump. They want people to say, you know what, I'm just tired of the Democratic Party's reaction to Trump. And it's a very distorted, warped political motivation or strategy. But that's the only thing they have now. The Supreme Court needs to get involved before sentencing because this is unconstitutional. He didn't even break a federal crime. And that's why the Supreme Court would likely, in a unanimous decision, back Trump, just the way they did so with the unanimous ruling overturning the Colorado ban right here.
Election result at different times. They say enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates rests with Congress and not the state. So the judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court cannot stand. That sounds like a clear message without having read the entire opinion, but a clear message that states do not have the power to do this.
Yes. We'll allow you a moment to get a few paragraphs into your big brain, Shannon. Let's move to our team now. Jonathan Turley, you are first up to react to this now, sir. How do you hear it?
Well, I've just been reading the opinion. It's obviously sweeping. There aren't any real dissents, so it does look like it is unanimous, at least on the result. What they have a disagreement on is whether the court had to go as far as it did. Now, the most practical result of this is that the voters will be able to vote for the candidate that they prefer. This was a critical moment for this court in history. After all of the years we have spent in this republic, we came to a point where these states claimed that they could unilaterally bar the leading presidential candidate from ballots to prevent people from voting for Donald Trump. The court here spoke with a strong, and it appears unanimous voice, at least on the result, that that's not going to happen, that voters will vote. They'll make their own verdict, regardless of what happens in cases involving President Trump. They will cast the most important verdict of all. They will vote for the next president of the United States.
Okay, stand by there, sir. Let's get another opinion in here. Andy McCarthy, what's your read?
I think Jonathan is right about the bottom line sweeping 9-0 decision with respect to the states, but
So the point is, ladies and gentlemen, like I've been saying, it's going to happen. You already have the precedent. It's going to take place, okay? Everything that I've been saying has taken place. I told you there would be a 9-0 Supreme Court decision overturning the Colorado ban, okay? I'm not saying that I know more about the Constitution than Colorado Supreme Court justices, but I was telling you that it would be a unanimous decision because it was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court will get involved because, as I'm trying to explain to everybody, the timeline only benefits Biden, is completely, beyond partisan. They're trying to jail him for a public relations stunt that hurts the country. The verdict is highly unconstitutional. It's the epitome of what an unconstitutional verdict would be. It relies on a federal crime, a federal statute that's non-existent. Trump did not break any federal laws. So hit subscribe if you're new. And if you're watching this channel, and if you've been watching for a while, pretty much everything that I've said, I'm not Nostradamus, but pretty much everything that I've said has taken place. So hit subscribe. This will be yet another victory for Trump.
If you're advising the Trump legal team, what would you advise them? What would the next steps be as we head into this July 11th sentencing?
Well, I think you have to look to an appeal. And, higher court judges in New York, Sean, are just like Mershon. I mean, they're mini-me's. This is a liberal, politically driven club. They protect their own. So I'm not optimistic at the former president's chances to overturn the conviction, which means that Trump's only real relief is in the federal courts. But that's the proper venue anyway, because as Jonathan pointed out, most of the
The federal courts, meaning the Supreme Court.
egregious violations by the judge, these were constitutional due process rights, for example, refusing to tell the defendant what this conspiracy crime was. We still don't know. That's a clear violation of the Sixth Amendment. And then, of course, telling the jury they can forget all about unanimity. That is a bedrock constitutional right derived from the Sixth and Seventh Amendment. Judge Mershon made a mockery of that, as well as justice, with a multitude of reversible errors that are quite shocking, I think, to everyone. And it's not, it is the federal courts, not state courts, that they're the ones who tend to scrupulously guard our due process rights. So, there may be a dual track here. You've got to go through the state system. Maybe you'll get lucky and, some judges with a conscience who are schooled in the law will look at this and say, this is fundamentally wrong. We reverse.
They haven't even told Trump the federal law, the federal statute that he broke. They haven't even told Trump which FEC laws that he broke. That's also unconstitutional. You can't just be convicted without knowing what you're convicted of.
But I think in the end, it's going to be the federal courts, maybe even the Supreme Court, that corrects this incredible injustice.
Yeah, let's get your take, Professor. And what would the next steps be for you if you were talking to President Trump's attorneys?
I would do something quite radical. I would move immediately for the sentencing to occur next week, not July 11th, so that you can get the appeal going. You can't appeal until there's a sentence. If the court refused to expedite the sentencing, I would try to take the case now immediately to the New York Court of Appeals, skipping the Intermediate Court of Appeals, which is a political court, Manhattan-based, Democrats largely. I would try to go right to the Court of Appeals and ask them for a decision within 30 days in order to get to the Supreme Court before the election. There's no reason to have the sentencing delayed until July 11th. The judge knows what he's going to do today.
Professor, why would you have any confidence that Judge Mershon would expedite the sentencing? Because I have, to me, I think the obvious thing to do if it was him would be to say, all right, you're released on your own recognizance pending appeal. I don't have faith he'll do that.
No, that's not the point. The point is to impose the sentence now so that there can be an appeal. If the judge refuses, as he would, take the case to the Court of Appeals and say, Your Honors, we want the sentencing to be done now so we can appeal. If the judge refuses to allow the sentencing to impose, Your Honors, let us appeal now. We're not going to appeal necessarily the sentencing now. We're going to appeal the conviction. So I would do everything to expedite this. Timing is everything.
So we'll get to also, ladies and gentlemen, all the different constitutional issues. Just one second.
This case ever came to trial, that it was a foregone conclusion there'd be a conviction. A biased judge, a biased jury, a biased prosecutor, a man who ran for office on the theory of let's find the crime to prosecute Trump for, and they couldn't find the crime, so they made it up. We're now a day after the verdict. I've known criminal law. I've been involved in criminal law 60 years. I still don't know what the crime is.
Right.
Was he found guilty of intending to violate tax laws, to violate the federal election laws, to defraud the voters? I still don't know, and we're a day after this. This is found guilty of 60 years. So they made it up.
This is why it'll be unanimous. Okay, this is why a Supreme Court decision will be unanimous or 7-2, 8-1, who knows? Here's why. What Professor Dershowitz says, brilliant man, what he says right now. And for anyone who thinks that Trump is guilty and beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's fair and the rule of law, and he has to pay for, I love when they say he has to be held accountable. Listen to this.
We're now a day after the verdict. I've known criminal law. I've been involved in criminal law 60 years. I still don't know what the crime is.
Right.
Was he?
Nobody knows what the crime is. Nobody knows the federal crime Trump committed. Not Alan Dershowitz, not Bradley Smith, not Hanze von Spakovsky, FEC chairman, lifelong legal scholars and lawyers, constitutional scholars. Nobody on the planet knows the federal law that Trump broke because he didn't break a federal law. That's why they're not telling people. It's so unconstitutional and un-American what took place.
Found guilty of intending to violate tax laws, to violate the federal election laws, to defraud the voters. I still don't know, and we're a day after this. This is the most outrageous case. You know, everybody knows the quote from Lavrenti Beria, the head of the KGB, and Stalin, when Beria said to Stalin,
"Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime."
No, find you the crime.
Find you the crime. Yeah.
Tried to find the crime, and he couldn't. So he made up the crime. He took it a step further than Stalin and Lavrenti Beria. This case will go down in history as one of the most abusive prosecutions since the trial of Aaron Burr back in 18 whatever. This is a stain on our criminal justice
really is.
system.
And by the way, you're not the only liberal Democrat saying that. We had this interesting piece that was in the New York Magazine, of all places, by a CNN analyst, Elie Honig. I don't know if you saw it, came out this morning. He says the charges against Trump are obscure and nearly entirely unprecedented. In fact, as you say, made up. No state prosecutor in New York or Wyoming or anywhere has ever charged federal election laws as a direct or predicate state crime against anyone for anything. None ever. So you're not the only liberal Democrat who believes that. I just wonder how many other folks out there.
The case is a state case predicated upon a federal law that is non-existent. The Federal Election Commission did not charge Trump. The FEC charged Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier. They fined Clinton and the DNC for purchasing the Steele dossier. The state case was predicated upon misdemeanors in record keeping that were beyond the statute of limitations. But because they came up with a federal statute that Trump broke, which he didn't break, and they didn't let anyone know which federal statute he broke, they elevated the misdemeanors to felonies. That's what took place. When they convicted him, they said that he broke federal campaign finance laws. The FEC stated the opposite. The Department of Justice never leveled any FEC laws against him, and former FEC chairman stated what he did was not against the law. Furthermore, the FEC looked at the hush money case and dropped it. Highly unconstitutional. It was a state conviction based on an imaginary federal crime. Just like the Colorado Supreme Court, it will be overturned, very likely unanimously.
Who used to be against Trump are now in his favor.
I can tell you, I get calls, whispered calls from liberal Democrat friends of mine saying, you're 100% right, but I won't say it publicly because I'm so thrilled that Trump got convicted, even though the conviction was outrageous. You get a lot of liberals who believe with Elie Honig and me that this is an unjustified conviction. We're willing to say it, but they're not willing to say it. And there's dancing on the streets, and there are people who are just, I get these emails. They're so thrilled that we violated the Constitution in order to get Trump. I have people telling me getting Trump elected is worse than undoing the Constitution. That's how extreme some of these people are. And, you know, it's not only this case, it's the three other cases. I go over each of them in my book, Get Trump. And every single one of them is based on conceptions that are in violation of the rule of law. This was the weakest case. This was the worst case, but it was in a very good jurisdiction.
But even Professor Dershowitz, did you imagine?
The Supreme Court also overturns corruption convictions, state convictions all the time. This isn't like, it wouldn't be that out of the ordinary anyway. So the thing is, it's like Trump's legal team they have to go directly to the Supreme Court. They should actually they should go directly to the Supreme Court, because it's going to take a year in the appeals court, New York Court of Appeals. They want to sentence Trump to jail. They want to be able to show the world that Trump is the criminal that they actually that Trump has engaged in the criminal activity that they've actually engaged in. So you have Democrats who've actually committed crimes, but they get the best, like they circumvent criminal liability, indictments, convictions. They're unbelievable at that. And what they want is to show the world, you see, we got Trump on record-keeping violations. And there was an imaginary federal statute, and now he's in prison. He's in jail. Do you really want to vote for somebody like that? Even if you like him, do you really want to vote for somebody like that you could see he's in jail with the Secret Service? I mean, come on. Don't you just want a normal Republican like Nikki Haley or DeSantis? And they would do the exact same thing to Nikki Haley and DeSantis. Trump has to treat them in a reciprocal manner, in the same manner, and he has more to work with. Like, they actually did commit crimes. Bribery and graft are serious national security issues. That's why 50 Intel officials went to bat for Hunter's laptop. Okay? There's a reason 50 Intel officials go to bat for Democrats. Okay? Because there's very likely criminal activity there. But for whatever reason, the Democratic Party gets the 50 Intel officials. You can speculate as to whatever reasons. The issue with this is that the Supreme Court must get involved before July 11th.
In your book, or even a few weeks ago, that the judge himself would bring so much of that prejudice. People are allowed to have their opinions. People are allowed to be inconsistent. But the judge is supposed to keep prejudice out of the courtroom. And his instructions to the jury, I've never seen anything like it. Somebody just called it a roadmap to conviction, which is essentially what it was. The judge is supposed to be neutral, if anything, on the side of the defense, because it's the prosecution that has to prove.
Bernaldo, God bless you. Thank you. God bless you.
Prove that something has been done illegally. But in this case, he was providing the jury with a road to conviction, was he not?
Yes. In fact, the day before the conviction, I wrote a column saying this was a directed verdict by the judge, that the judge was directing the jury to convict. And by the way, he didn't have to. The jury would have convicted anyway. Once the jury was selected from New York voters, 85% of whom don't want to see Trump as their president, the die was cast. This case should have been tried in a different county. It should have been tried in Staten Island or in Rockland County, where you get some chance of getting a fair jury. This was an unfair jury from the beginning. So the judge didn't even have to go as far as he went, but he did. And he essentially ruled in a way that made it impossible for the jury to acquit or even to hang.
Right.
I thought there would be a hung jury. But once I heard the instructions, I said, no way. You're going to get 12 jurors. I was surprised it took them 10 hours. I think maybe they just filibustered a little bit and checked off some boxes.
Yeah.
I think they just convict this guy as soon as they went into the jury box, even before they heard the evidence.
Now, former President Trump, who, by the way, is still under this gag order, and we can talk about that, but he talked about it, but he went pretty far in testing out the limits of the gag order, where he was allowed to go, talking clearly about a couple of people that he's not allowed to mention by name, but one of whom was Michael Cohen. And the really obnoxious thing that happened, I think certainly grounds for appeal, was the prosecution saying that because Michael Cohen had a plea deal that involved election interference, that necessarily meant that Trump was guilty of election interference. The judge originally said he wasn't going to allow that suggestion to be made, but the prosecution made it, and when the defense objected to it, that objection was overruled by the judge, even though he said he was going to prevent it from happening. Here's Donald Trump talking about it this morning. Roll tape.
But the three things that he pled on, having to do with the election and having to do essentially a little bit with me, they weren't crimes. They weren't crimes. Nor is paying money under an NDA.
So again, he was convicted of things that weren't crimes.
Of course he was. Not only that, but
It will be so amazing when the Supreme Court overturns this absurd, unconstitutional. They can go to the Supreme Court. In fact, one of his lawyers was saying that he won't even be sentenced. One of his lawyers was saying that, I forgot which one, that the Supreme Court, they can file an emergency brief or writ and get it to the Supreme Court before sentencing because of the nature, because Democrats waited until 2024 for all of this. Gee, what a coincidence. And so it could get there is an avenue for it to get to the Supreme Court before July 11th. I believe you have to have 4 justices, something like 4 or 5 justices, something like that, even 3 or 4 vote to hear the petition or appeal, to look at it, something like they'll get that. For sure, you have Alito, Thomas. I talked about this on the channel the past couple of days. Alito, Thomas, Kavanaugh for sure. Alito and Thomas definitely. Then you have, Coney Barrett, Roberts. So anyway, this will definitely, this has to happen before July 11th, but the Supreme Court will get involved, everybody. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, God bless you all. Thank you. Hit subscribe to this channel if you're new. The Supreme Court will get involved. This is June 4th, 2024. It's already at Vox. Other publications, they're talking about it everywhere now. This is the biggest story. And I have told you from the second that he was convicted, I said Supreme Court. You can look back at the channel 3-4 days ago. Now everyone's talking about it. Hit subscribe, everybody. I'll be back 10 p.m. tonight.